Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for choosing to be here. My name is Mike Wittenstein, and I'm a co-founder at Full Circle. We're building an advanced and engaging platform that connects the African diaspora through personalized digital experiences. The primary purpose of this webinar is to give you a sneak peek at the Our Sacred collection and to hear its powerful story. But there's something I want you to know first. Full Circle is grateful to have the opportunity to be a small part of bringing this collection to the world because it's emblematic of the millions of diaspora stories we believe are out there waiting to be shared. Our job is simple. Shine a light on them so they can become part of our collective consciousness. The Our Sacred Museum at the Museu da República, the Museum of the Republic, celebrates and reflects a large and complex context. Bringing it all together is nothing less than a repair the world kind of concept. It's a model of extensive and successful collaboration among people and their institutions, professions, and perspectives. It's also a valuable example of how through storytelling, open-mindedness overcomes fear and anger becomes understanding. The world's museums are rechartering themselves to take a new role in society. The Museum of the Republic is one of the first, consciously changing public perception from a building with old things, from which a dictator ruled and ordered the police to raid religious gatherings, to a stage for hosting crucial conversations, the ones that help us move forward together. Julia?
Thank you, Mike. I've actually got paper here. My name is Julia Michaels, and I'm the other Full Circle co-founder. We have our interpreters here, Hani Souza and Robert Greathouse. Thank you both. Please see the interpretation instructions in the chat. We have 90 minutes and they're going to fly by, so let's go. Be thinking of questions as you listen and please put them in the chat. They'll be addressed after all our guests have spoken about their work. Our fundraising chief, Karen Rout, is helping out with timing. She will gently let our speakers know when they need to wind up, even though I'm sure we'll want to hear so much more. We also have wonderful help from Comunica, the web hosting company, it's such a relief to be working with Felipe Dominguez and Rafael Mormel, and I think some other people whom I don't even know who they are. Karen, Mike, and the rest of the team and I would be thrilled if you would consider making a donation to Full Circle to help bring the platform to life. Details for this and everything else you need will be in the chat. And sign up for our platform waitlist too, so you can be one of Full Circle's first users. We are grateful to the group of religious leaders who share management of the Our Sacred collection, represented tonight by Mother Nilce, whom we'll hear from first. We would also like to thank the Museu da República and its generous and thoughtful director, Mario Chagas, who kindly offered to partner with Full Circle for this event. The Museum of the Republic is amazing, and you should visit it in Rio. It has gorgeous gardens with lots of community activities and was once Brazil's presidential palace. The museum has long housed the gifts that presidents receive, so the Our Sacred collection is quite a new experience for everyone. Ironically, the former president Getúlio Vargas, who sent the police to raid religious gatherings in the 1930s, once lived there. I am personally grateful also to André Andion Angulo, director of the museum's depository facility, who generously introduced me to much new information and many new people there. The museum's research director, Maria Helena Versiani, my teacher in the language of Our Sacred, and we are thankful for her huge help, will also be speaking this evening. When I say that Maria Helena has taught me some of the language of Our Sacred, I am not referring to the Yoruba language, or Yoruba, as one says when speaking English. This language is used in the Candomblé religion. But I am referring to the very special words we use to speak of the collection in any language, given how sacred it is. We also thank Quiproquo Filmes. It was their film documentation of the 2020 transfer of the collection from the police to the museum where I first heard about it. They also helped with access to funding for the work of museologist Emanuelle Rosa and historian Eduardo Possidonio, who tonight will share their experiences with and feelings about our sacred. Thank you. Thank you too for your hard work, Team Full Circle, many of whom are present. Thank you all for being here at this international debut of the Our Sacred collection. It is also Full Circle's first international event, so we are truly excited, and we can't wait to see the exhibit when it opens. As I said, Mãe Nilce is our first speaker to help us understand what the collection is, what it represents. She is a Mãe de Santo, or priestess of the Afro-Brazilian Candomblé religion, and a member of the Our Sacred co-management group, which includes religious leaders and museum professionals. I won't give any spoilers, but Mãe Nilce's childhood and family have a great deal to do with this story. You will also hear her speak about RENAFRO, an acronym which stands for, in translation, the National Network for Afro-Brazilian Religion and Health. Mãe Nilce coordinates RENAFRO and is also IAEB, or community mother, of Ile Omolu Oxum, the house of Orishas, Omolu, and Oxum, and I see by her smile I'm pronouncing it right, a Candomblé place of worship or terreiro. Mãe Nilce is tirelessly instrumental in Brazil's work to wipe out religious racism and to elevate spirituality as a healing experience. She travels all over the world and is just back from a UN meeting in Geneva. We'd love to hold a webinar just about her work, but I will simply turn the microphone over now so we can learn as much as possible from her. Mãe Nilce, por favor.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Julia. Good evening to all. Thank you all for joining us. I'm a woman of Ashe. Ashe means vital energy. Everything that is good is Ashe. Everything that we do in our temples, we salute the Orishas. And now I'm saluting Eshu, the Orisha, who is the messenger. She's singing in Yoruba right now. So I'm paying homage to Eshu, the Orisha. You know, our struggle is really linked to my aunt. For over 30 years, she fought. She's been fighting so that we would get our things back. My meninazinha now is 87 years old, and she spent all of her life together with her grandmother to try to get those objects back. And now I'm 73 years old, and for all of my life, I've heard her telling us that we had to get our things back. And I didn't know what were those things. And when we launched the campaign in 2016, Free Our Sacred, we managed to get the artifacts, Afro-Brazilian religious artifacts that were in the police museums. And you know, during our conversation right now, both Eduardo and Emanuelle are going to share information with you on how we got the religious artifacts back. RENAFRO, which is the National Network for Afro-Brazilian Religions and Health. Currently, we have 53 centers throughout Brazil. And we've been doing work to stimulate people to have access to health, specifically people who worship Candomblé and Umbanda, which are Afro-Brazilian religions. And people often question me, why did I decide to become a priestess in Candomblé, it was because of pain. No, love, no. I was born in a Candomblé temple, and I know everything that we do in Candomblé temples and Candomblé worship areas. Oftentimes, people come to us because they need help and they can't get help in other places. For instance, when we had the HIV pandemic, people were desperate and they knew they were going to die. And what we did was to provide them with comfort, listen to them, and provide them with guidance too. I went to 17 different cities to deliver talks on HIV. And I was telling them that it was important for us to discuss that. Some women, sometimes they face gender-based violence and their husbands are violent to them and they don't go to the police. They come to our temples, the Candomblé temples. And we face another pandemic in Brazil, which is the religious racism. And I'm too familiar with that pain. We who are Candomblé worshippers, we suffer from that disease. It hurts our soul. So it's the second time I go to the UN, and this time I went there to talk about religious racism. So through RENAFRO, we conducted a survey that has never been done before, and we managed to connect to over 200 Candomblé temples and discuss religious racism with them. I'm here in Salvador, Bahia, Brazil, and tomorrow we are launching our campaign again, which is Respect My Candomblé Temple. It's important that people respect Candomblé houses because our houses are also open to everybody. During the pandemic, you know, during the pandemic, we provided people with food because they were going hungry. We were the ones providing people with support. But people who are religious racist, they don't understand the work we do. So this is one of the reasons why I try to always talk about what Candomblé temples are. I know what they are because I was born and raised in that environment. So I would like to call you and pay attention to that. I'm not the only one. There are plenty of different Candomblé temples in Brazil. Right now, I'm conducting a survey and I'm trying to establish a partnership with Brazil's public ministry, with Brazil's human rights ministry, and also with Rio de Janeiro University, so that together we can conduct the survey and show the strength of Candomblé temples and show that Candomblé temples are places to provide people with support so that people can overcome this negative idea of Candomblé temples. In my Candomblé temple, Ile Omolu Oxum, in 1997, for instance, over 100 young people, they would come to my temple to learn a profession and, no longer live on the street. We are the ones who provide support for families who lost their houses. But racism doesn't see the terreiros, the Candomblé temples, as that. We have launched plenty of work, not only here in Brazil, but to other parts of the world. I've recently been to Argentina. I've discussed religious racism there. I went to Geneva to also discuss religious racism there. And I tell my Orishas that we're going to overcome. I don't know if we'll be able to eliminate religious racism, but we're going to curb this evil, and this is bad for our health. Religious racism is bad for our health. For instance, our children can't go to school wearing this kind of beads, and the school says no. And we know that basically it's because of religious racism. For instance, going to school on Fridays wearing white because it's something that we Candomblé practitioners do. Children are not allowed to do it. And I tell people not to call me macumbeira, I tell people to call me Candomblé practitioner. You know, whenever I need to go to a hospital, people tell me to take out my beads, and it's unfair. You know, if I need to undergo, um, blood testing, it doesn't make any sense. This is the result of racism. And basically, what I want is that we can move forward and actually fight religious racism. I hope that we can manage to show people what we do in a Candomblé temple. We provide people with food security. We do amazing work. Our doors are open. People can come and visit us and get to know what we do. Today it's a Wednesday. Today it's the day of Shango and Orisha responsible for justice, and the Orisha Yansan responsible for the wind. And I hope that these Orishas take away religious racism so that we can have peace, health, love. Ashe, thank you very much.
My Nilce, thank you so much. I learned a lot. Julia told me I would learn a lot about religious racism and the connection between health and religion. And you've told us not only what you think, but what Candomblé does and what your everyone is working toward. I feel closer. Thank you. Let's turn our attention now to our next speaker. Maria Helena Versiani is the Museum of the Republic's research coordinator and historian. With a master's in social history, a PhD in history, politics, and cultural assets, and a postdoc in history, she's coordinated the historical documentation of the Our Sacred collection. What makes her a unique contributor is her ability to forge meaningful connections among history, memory, and cultural heritage. She's also part of a team pioneering the effort to create a model for co-management of museum exhibits. It's drawing interest worldwide, and she'll explain more about it. Maria Helena.
Hello, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here on another open space where we will discuss our sacred. That's very good, and it's important to know about this group of sacred objects for Afro-Brazilian religions. It's a wealth of the Brazilian Afro religions, and they really help us face religious racism and state conducted racism in Brazil. So thank you, Julia, Mike, and everyone else. Well, our sacred is a group of sacred objects from different Brazilian Afro religions, which has been created from collection in temples and other sacred spaces in Rio de Janeiro and Brazil. These violations took place in the first 6 decades of our Republican regime here in Brazil. And they happened although the first constitution of the Brazilian Republic from 1891 already protected the rights of religion. So can I share my screen here? I forgot to do that. it would be great if I could share some images here. But if not, that's fine. Can you see it? I can't hear you, so I might need to stop. Okay, we can see it. All right, so I mentioned the Constitution, and that reminded me that I had some slides to show. But as I was saying, the first Constitution, that is, the first Republican Constitution in Brazil, ensured the right to freedom of religion. But 1 year before it was passed, we had the 1890 Penal Code. And in this Penal Code, and later on in the 1940 Penal Code, which was later, they found a basis to criminalize Afro-Brazilian religions. So these religions were associated to charlatanism, to colorism, and it basically gave a legal grounding for racism and prejudice and stereotypes about Brazilian African religions. The most important thing is to realize that from any angle you look at, our sacred is the result of racism and criminal persecution from any perspective. So we look at, we will see religious racism. So in that sense, I'm going to present Maria Helena de Oxum, which is an Orisha in a very well-respected Candomblé temple in the state of Rio de Janeiro. And she spoke about these violations, and she spoke it much better than I could. What she says is that many of our temple keepers, Orishas, Orishas, were physically harmed, were arrested, were thrown in jail, and our objects were had to be forfeited. They are our wealth, they're our gold, they're our sacred, and they are worth a lot more than golds. They have a lot of value, but not for the police. We were called witches, and that's not what we are. We celebrate the Orishas, who are the elements of nature. So those are the words of Mãe Meninazinha, summarizing it as she does very well. What happened during decades in Brazil. And the objects, the sacred objects that were forfeited, were kept at the police station. As she said, on the hands of the police. In 1945, they were taken to the Museum of Crime, which is now called the Museum of the Civil Police in the state of Rio de Janeiro. So you can see that this group of sacred objects for Afro-Brazilian religions was kept for decades in a museum on crime. So that was the condition. Of course, there were claims to free these sacred objects. And they were able to find it through, find strength, find perseverance, leadership, a special leadership through Mãe Meninazinha de Oxum. From the late 60s, she was already tirelessly seeking social movements, activists, political authorities to find support for her struggle to free these sacred objects. And then finally in 2020, on September 2020, our sacred was taken from the police museum and to the Museum of the Republic. So her struggle and Her community struggle is a chapter of Brazilian history that must be known, that must be told for to the future generations, because this is a struggle that still requires reparations, still requires justice. And it helps us to retell the story and the history of Brazil through more inclusive terms. What I would like to do today is to deal on a different topic. Specifically, I would like to talk a bit about some of the meanings that we can find when this collection was transferred to the Museum of the Republic. So why was it taken to the Museum of the Republic? That's a question that we hear since the transfer happened in 2020. But why are we questioning that? Well, this is how things happened. Maybe I should start by saying that a group of religious leaders who were protagonists in this struggle to free our sacred at a certain point in 2018 went to the Museum of the Republic and asked the museum director if he would take this collection. I honestly don't think it should be a surprise for anyone that the Museum of the Republic would be called in for this social function. And secondly, that it would have accepted the challenge, because at the time, the museum was an enthusiast of social museology. They have a background there, and I should tell about it quickly in the time we have. The Museum of the Republic was created in 1960. And it was created to be a museum of conservation and cataloging and exhibiting items related to the experiences of the Brazilian elite. So for a long time, the museum basically represented only the excluding part of the Brazilian society, only of the elite. So they were preserving, conserving, and exposing items related to the dominant parts of society. And that's how it told the story of Brazil. But that wasn't how it always was. At a certain point, it changed. In the 1980s, the museum was already starting to go through a process renewing its way of thinking in how it conducted its work. It started questioning its social function. It started questioning what role it played and what commitment it had to facing the issues that society had. So during this debate, educator Paulo Freire carried a lot of importance. That is, his defense of freeing, emancipating education that was committed to facing social logics that would perpetuate and naturalize social injustice. So his defense of social justice really moved many professionals in museums to start rethinking about what colonial logic they were perpetuating and naturalizing in their museums. So that's when this idea gained strength, the idea that museums are a space where we should value the diversity of cultural expressions that we have in our society. And this idea started gaining strength, that we have to replace that memory of power for the power of memory. Mario Chagas describes it this way: museums can be a space to celebrate the memory of power, or they can be devices that are interested in working through the power of memory. Memory is a strategic category in a museum that gives value to social values, to our memory. Luis Antonio Simas also referred to racism in the same direction. He says, "You are fooled if you think racism is limited to the social perception of physical characteristics. definitely its most hateful manifestation. Racism is actually a phenomenon that unfolds in different fields of perception. One of the most frequent practiced but least seen starts from making symbolic goods inferior from those that were subjugated by colonialism. When we consider that beliefs, dances, uh, foods, visions of the world, ways of celebrating life, of burying their dead, and educating children of certain groups are inferior, we are operating in the field of racism. So, what am I driving at? The Museum of the Republic, which right now is valuing multiple modes of living in Brazil, multiple cultures in Brazilian society, is the museum that received our sacred in September 2020. It was them. And when it went to the Museum of the Republic, this is important to say, there were at least two things agreed on, which are important to mention, and I hope I have enough time. The first was that we needed to understand that this transfer was taking place through the terms of a reparation of justice. So it's important to understand that the same building that now houses the Museum of the Republic at the end of the 19th century, from then until 1960, it was the seat of the President of Brazil. So it was from this building that we got the orders to invade temples, or at least they agreed to them. And now that same building is a representative space that's freeing for Afro-Brazilian religions. It's a place of memory, it's a place of respect, valuing and celebrating Afro-Brazilian religions. We know how much we celebrate them in our events at the museum. So that's a part of the importance, but there's another fact that I consider to be even more relevant, which is understanding that with this transfer, we needed to create a group that would share the management of this collection. So we would need to create a group with the religious figures who were heading the struggle to free the collection and who still have continuous contact with the museum and its directors. So they're together in doing that. This group works across all fronts, across all initiatives connected to the Our Sacred Collection. And they have a decision-making power there. I love that my Nilce is here because she can correct me if I'm wrong, but they do have authority. And that's not a small feat. What I want to say is that the knowledge that we have that was built over experiencing religiosity needs to be seen and understood as essential information to preserve our sacred. A co-management group with representatives from the religious community. It needs to be recognized and it needs to be paid. I'm referring to the fact that people need to be recognized. Their professional knowledge should be recognized because this is the knowledge, this is the expertise that they have in relation to our sacred. So this needs to be acknowledged. They are the PhDs of our sacred. When you introduced me and you mentioned my academic background, well, they are the ones who are PhDs of our sacred. This needs to be understood. These are not empty words. It really needs to be a part of reparations. I'm going to conclude, I promise. When we say that we need to conserve our sacred, we're not simply referring to preserving a group of objects. That's not what we mean. What needs to be valued and preserved is the entire tradition behind these objects. It's a cultural sense of our sacred, which involves the objects, the people, the way of experiencing religion. All of it needs to be valued and conserved. I think that's the point that I had, and I also want to say that in this story, the museum does not have any protagonism and it does not want to be the protagonist. The authority, the protagonism, is the group on the group that represents the religious community. They're the ones. And when we transferred the collection, my meninazinha said, "Now you can leave it on our hands." And that's it. I think now we can leave it on their hands. Thank you very much for everything you've taught me. That's all.
Muito obrigada, Maria Helena. Thank you so much.
Olha,
Oh, what a great slide. What a moment that was in the worst of the pandemic. This incredible, powerful moment, historic moment. And Maria Helena, your passion just comes through. And thank you very, very much. And now we're going to hear from Emanuelle. There I am.
boa noite.
Emanuelle,
Primeiramente, a bênção, minha mãe Nilce, que está aqui presente. Agradeço.
just a moment, Emanuelle. Vou te apresentar.
Ah, claro, por favor, obrigada.
She has lots to say. I'll be quick. She's an amazing young person, as I'm sure you can already see, a museologist and a practitioner of Candomblé. She both gives to and receives from the Our Sacred collection, in my opinion, and I think after she speaks, you'll get a sense of that for yourself. She's a master's student in sociology and anthropology at the Rio de Janeiro Federal University, and has a BA in museology from the same institution, earned in 2020. She's got experience in the areas of documentation, education, exhibits, and research in racial ethnic relations, carnival, and cultural heritage. She has also developed work in theater and audiovisual areas. And in addition to her work as a museologist on the Our Sacred team at the Museum of the Republic, she develops projects associated with memory and collections at samba schools, which are groups that do samba. That's a whole other subject matter. And with quilombos, which are territories occupied by formerly enslaved Africans. Emanuelle, please, it's your turn. And welcome.
Thank you. Good evening to all. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for listening to me. It's great to join a group of plenty of people who are actually interested in not only learning about history, but also setting forth practices so that we can think of ideas and think about actions for the future. So thank you, all of you, for joining us and for being interested in building a fairer society and a better society for all. I hope that at the end of our meeting, we have proposals for improving society at large. I'll try to be brief. And basically, I want to tell you that I'm a worship Candomblé practitioner, and people in my family carry the same cultural and religious belief. I've learned a lot in Candomblé temples, and I keep on learning. And I'm now learning how to take care of my sacred. So the more I learn about taking care of my ancestrality, my ancestry, the more I learn about myself. There's no difference between my private life and my work life to me. So I go to my Candomblé temple, I worship the Orishas, and when I'm not at the Candomblé temple, I'm doing the same. I'm doing work towards elevating my Orishas. So I would like to thank Mãe Nilce, who was the one who helped me join this group, and the religious leaders. They're part of all of the processes, and they were part of the selection process where I was selected. And Mãe Nilce asked me a question I'll never forget in my whole life, and she asked, how are you going to mediate your personal, spiritual, and your technical knowledge? And I honestly told her, I don't know. I don't know how to do that. You know, at college, there was no subjects that were meant for us to deal with collections and sacred, but I promised that every single day of my life, I would try to get that answer. And some years later, I've noticed that maybe there's not a concrete answer to that question. And maybe the good thing is that I will never feel fully satisfied. I'll keep on doing work to build something, and each and every community is going to have a different need. When I first started working in our sacreds, I tried to contact other institutions in Brazil that would try to provide us with support. And I found out that no institution was doing what we're doing right now. And we are setting an example. We are an inspiration for other institutions. And one of the things I noticed, not only in Brazil, but also abroad, few institutions are doing something similar to what we do. So we're doing something which is new, and we have the chance to exchange with other institutions. The work we do at the Museum of the Republic provides us with the support to discuss reparations. And we also learn a lot from the religious leaders. I believe that the only way for institutions to work, approach racial ethnic issues is by listening to people, to the religious leaders. The institutions and academia need to listen to religious leaders. Therefore, the co-management group is the cornerstone for the work we do. And there's no way of doing work without consulting with religious leaders. When we think about racism, racism is something quite dynamic. Racism is linked not only to hate, but also to desire. Racism shows itself in different masks and different fantasies. Now that the archives, the collection is at the museum, in the past, the police said they were protecting the items. And one thing that Maria Helena commented was the work that the police did. But our goods, African goods, they have always been interesting for people because they have placed both hate and desire towards those objects. Racist people, they want our belongings, they want our things, but they don't want to deal with us. They want to deal with how we live, but they have always been interested in us. And even political leaders who would used to badmouth Candomblé temples, they also used to go to Candomblé temples to ask for help. So when we consider our society, Candomblé temples are places where people can go and ask for help. Whoever goes there, they're going to receive help and support. So in Candomblé temples in the past, politicians used to go there, celebrities and rich people, they used to go. And at the same time, they would support religious racism. So when we consider desire as, a driver for religious racism, this is not something new. And I think that for us to overcome the problems, we need to have the religious leaders to join us. Louvre collection, for instance, they have African artifacts, and they have artifacts from other parts of the world other than France. I believe that for us to do something different, not only should we consult and ask questions to religious leaders, but we should also have them participate in the process. For us to fight religious racism, we need their help. And I would really like to highlight this. We need to bear in mind that interest, desire, and hate come together. I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to show you some of the artifacts right now. So in my master's, I do this research. When I joined the Our Sacred group, at the same time, I was approved in the master selection process. And I've been conducting research focused on reparations. And I don't think that reparations is something that we can do it once. I believe that reparations are daily activities, such as this seminar, such as the Full Circle initiative. So all of those things together, they are practices of reparations. I believe that what we try to do at the Museum of the Republic, it's a daily type of reparation action. Museology is put to the service of reparations, and we're not going to change what happened in the past. It's impossible to go back in time and stop the raids from happening in Candomblé temples. Some of those temples, they don't even exist anymore. So how can we perform reparations right now and change reality? So I see reparations as daily actions. So whenever we go to Museum of the Republic, we do actions. We are fostering museology towards reparations. It's easy for us to fall on traps of the past. And now that we have the religious leaders doing work with us, it makes sure that we're going to bear reparations in mind. Here you can see the images of the day of the transfer of the items. So whenever you go to the Museum of the Republic, try to understand the connections of technical things and cultural things. Oftentimes we see Candomblé temples as spaces for technologies as temples. And sometimes we go to academia and we hypervalue academia. We too can learn from religious leaders and also from the academia. So we must put together formal knowledge and religious knowledge and build joint knowledge. Through this joint knowledge, we can have equality. And not only should we make sure that we have free transit, but also we want the institutions to learn from the religious leaders. How are we going to transform our sacreds in something bigger than a single exhibition? You know, for instance, if I'm no longer a member or other people are no longer working at Museu da República, we want this exhibition, this collection to keep on impacting reparations. Therefore, we need to materialize this. My challenge at the Museum of the Republic and also in the research I'm doing, how can we systematize and standardize systems so that these pieces that are highly valuable and whenever we need to keep them up, but at the museum police, they used to keep the drums lying on the ground. So when you go to a Candomblé temple, we have a specific order to keep the drums and they need to be kept in an upwards position. There's a depository where we keep the artifacts and we keep our sacred artifacts there. We created this wooden support for each of the drums. Placing the drums in a upward position is highly symbolic. And for us, this is the way it should be. For us who are Candomblé practitioners, this is the way it should be. This is the way of actually doing co-management. It's like Candomblé knowledge is entering the institutions. Currently, we use social museology, but I too do research on museology of the state, doing co-management. And we noticed that the police transferred the archives when there was a change in management. The Museum of the Republic is quite traditional. However, the people who are working there now, they really want to change things and they want to build something which is going to be long-term. We want to use the concrete space of the building and we want that institution to go beyond the persona. How are we going to do so that the work of this, our sacred collection, reverberates over time? So here you can see other items that are highly valuable for Candomblé practitioners, and those pieces, they should be placed on the ground and not on a shelf. And of course, a museum is never going to be like a terreiro, a Candomblé temple. We're not imitating a Candomblé temple. We're not naive. We're aware that those items are not part of Candomblé temples' everyday activities anymore. We don't have logic answers to this, but basically what we're doing is to do dynamic work and we keep on reflecting about what our practices. That's why I keep saying that reparations are part of everyday life. And our sacred is communicating. Our culture, African culture, is seen as oral culture, but we also see pieces that are aesthetically valuable and they have value for other reasons. And basically, we're doing our best to preserve those pieces. I'm not going to tell you that it's easy to preserve those objects. Each and every day we question what we're doing. And I hope that in the future we can do things in a different way and learn more and make room for change. And we can't stop. And we can't feel like there's nothing else to do. Basically, we need to keep on doing research and establish a dialogue with our sacred artifacts. I'm not going to discuss the historical research because Eduardo and Maria Helena have approached that. I believe that I told you most of what I wanted to say, and maybe I'll try not to say things that Eduardo is going to approach on his presentation. And I like to show religious leaders' face, and I really want to show the people who are behind the work. Because sometimes we think that the Museum of the Republic is just a building, but the people who go there to work, they're the ones who keep that place alive. And that's why I like to finish my presentation showing people's faces. And thank you so much. I hope that I have kept within time, and thank you. Ashe.
Hey, Emanuelle, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. My two takeaways were that the quest that my Nilce set you on and how that's affected your life and helped you help other people. And I will never forget something you said, reparations as a daily activity. But that, that's so smart. I love that. Thank you. Now,
My Nilce does that to people. That's her job, and she does it very well.
so my Nilce, thank you. Obrigado para você também. Okay, Eduardo, you're up next. Are you ready? You have big shoes to fill. Eduardo has a PhD in social history, especially his understanding of how religious traditions blend over time and geography. He even wrote a book about that. So he's going to give you an insider's view at how our past shapes our thinking about today and what's next. No stock tips, though. As you will hear, he's working with the collection and its documentation to bring alive a Rio of yesteryear. Specifically, he will speak about what the arrival of our sacred at the museum means to him and his exciting work with it. Edu.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening. Good evening to everyone watching. Julia, Karen. I love seeing so many familiar names. And thank you to Full Circle for inviting me to be here. As was said before, we've been working for a little over 2 years with this collection. Over my academic experience, I had been doing some research on sacred practices for Afro-Brazilian religions and the heritage that we received from Central African peoples that were brought to Brazil throughout so many years of slavery in Brazil. Let me just set my timer here. And we talked a bit about how the collection came to us. I remember that I was defending my PhD dissertation during the COVID pandemic, and we heard that the Freedom to Our Sacred campaign was successful. This was introduced by Emanuelle and Nilce, and after that, we heard a public bid, and I was fortunate to be selected to do historical research on the collection. I knew about this collection from the perspective of some authors, for example, Robert Sverrisson from the US, Yvonne McGee from Brazil, but we had never seen the collection itself. It was written about, it was discussed through some photographs. So it was not widely published and communicated about. So I was very happy to be able to see the objects that I had been writing about and discussing now in the Museum of the Republic. And now, very briefly, well, initially that wasn't the starting point for our historical study. I remember, and Manu mentioned that the question that my Nilce got during the interview. and I received a striking question from her. She asked me how I saw this fight against religious racism. And this is a part of my daily experience. I'm a teacher in the public network of schools. I also am a professor in African history. So this is a practice that we need to have every day. We don't need a specific um, class to fight racism, but we need this fight to take place every day in everything we do at all times. So I was very happy to receive this question from my Nilce that day, and I think it was very clear that it would be a pleasure to deal with this effort. And I want to show you one of the ways in which we are combating racism through a historical perspective, which has been by giving life to religious leaders. Our current study in the Museum of the Republic has allowed us to understand not only the meaning of these items. We have, for example, an image that appeared across all the different presentations we saw tonight. We were greeted with a song for Eshu. Manu and Maria Helena also presented this, and here we see Lalu. This is one of the objects that is the most iconic in our collection. And it's a good way of understanding how we've been doing research lately. So through historical documents that are now understood as historical in different collections and archives in Brazil, especially our National Archive, our National Library, documents that were used for repression and for fighting against these sacred practices, with investigations, with lawsuits, with uh, uh, you know, accusations that religious leaders had to face with the police. Now these documents are taking the opposite path. They're allowing us to understand these practices better, and they're giving us the possibility of understanding who the leaders were, how these temples worked, or what practices were taking place there. It's the case of Lalu. With the police investigation, which was filed against Mãe Luzia Cardoso in 1935, she was arrested in 1934, in late 1934, under the administration of President Getúlio Vargas, as we heard during Julia's presentation, when she talked about the space, the Museum of the Republic. But she had to face this investigation in the first months of 1935. Through these documents, we were able to find a lot of information about the temple. First, the name of the religious leader. We gave her visibility. We gave names to people who had their homes invaded and taken by the police. It also allowed us to understand who these agents were who were repressing these temples. So, for example, we can see here in the files of the document that the police chief was Delcidio Gonçalves, who was also fighting against samba schools in the city of Rio de Janeiro. Last year was the 100th anniversary of the Portela Samba School. And before it was called Vai Como Pode. So it was named after this. And it gives us an understanding of how Black practices were being persecuted against. We heard that statement, they want our objects, they want our things, but they don't want our presence. So that was a time in which temples, samba schools, and capoeira was persecuted. But this allowed us to understand where she lived. if you know with if you work with history, you know that history is very close to us. And I've been seeing this from the beginning that we would probably bump up against some stories and some people who connected to the current days and to the past. It's been great to find this through the museum, through the people who visit us, visit this collection in um, the technical area. So this, for example, is Araújo Leitão Street, where she was arrested. It still exists. It no longer uh, is a temple, right? Many of these temples went to the outskirts of São Paulo, but the street is still there. There are some elders there who remember this temple that existed there. So in this police file, we also found um, a statement by her as a priestess, as a member of the Umbanda community, who were the entities who were there with her, Eshu, Lalu, and the um, requests and wishes that they made at the time in the Umbanda temple that was under her. And here we can also perceive some of the police violence she faced. She starts off by saying how much her great grandmother and Davina told her that they needed to remove their things from the hands of the police. I just want to highlight that the violence that took place then was not physical, it was liturgical violence. None of these temples were invaded, and this is evident when we see the documents. None of these temples were invaded when they were closed. Quite contrary, they were invaded at the height of their liturgical celebrations. So, uh, at the time where they were going through the sacred rites of Umbanda and Candomblé, they were interrupted. These ceremonies were being interrupted by the police. So, taking these names, these requests, is an example of that. Having a signature of the police chief making something sacred into evidence of a certain presumed crime is also an evidence of that. Lalu appears in the police investigation and was photographed to serve as evidence against Mãe Luzia Cardoso. But look at the opposite path right now. When this became a document, they invited in as a defense witness Artur Cunha, who was 43. He was a widower of her godmother, and he was a sculptor. So he was the person who produced this sculpture of Lalu. So it's interesting to see how much information we get. Everyone who works in the depository facility and with the Brazilian platform to catalog the museum items now know and have already documented that this object belonged to Mãe Luzia, that it came from that street, and that it was made by that sculptor. And this is a kind of reparation as well. It's a way of giving voice and understanding them. Another kind of document we've been using are newspapers, which were outlets that were trying to fight against these temples. Actually, they had a dubious role. When you look at the context of the late 19th century and the early 20th century in Brazil, we find many publications talking about these temples, and some of them, some of the authors are famous and have become the theme of some samba schools, such as Vagalume, who was the theme of Império Serrano. But the same newspapers were um, we're going against these temples. So we see here the second edition of the A Noite newspaper, who had on its cover an image of a sacrificial animal in a ceremony dedicated to Ogum. Their third edition, on the same day in the evening, this was a very famous newspaper, so they had high numbers in Rio de Janeiro. And next to the news about the presidency and all of the Republican movements in the uh, capital, they saw the objects and the religious leaders. So we see here Pai Alberto, and you can see that he has Ogum written on his shirt. He's holding a trident and a shield, and he appears as if he were a trophy next to the policeman with his objects. This was a picture taken inside the police station. The first police station that was basically on drugs, vice, and intoxications. It was a police station that worked against temples in the city of Rio de Janeiro. And, as Manu also said, we have most of the objects that came from Paiobe's house. So we have, for example, these shirts from Paioberto. You notice that it said Ogum, and here is the actual shirt that he was wearing. Later on, we intend to analyze the materials, but it's possible that we might have sweat on this shirt. Ritualistic sweat, because it was a ceremony on St. George's Day, which is still a very important ceremony in the Umbanda temples in Rio de Janeiro. He was probably stressed, right? He was taken to a police station wearing his clothes. And as I said before, the biggest violence they suffered was liturgical violence. So if this was in the collection, it meant that he had to go back, probably nude, besides having his ceremony invaded. And he had to leave behind his religious attire. So when we're trying to understand who he is, that in a way is a reparation for what the police did in the past. So here it is, his trident, a shield, one of the helmets, and this is an effort of investigation. So we have to place the image next to the photograph and next to the publications, and they're not always clear, right? These are newspapers from a long time ago, but we can see here that it's the same drum, it's the same object, which is called in Rio de Janeiro a candongueiro. Based on that document, we also have his address. It's a street that still exists. We can find it on Google Maps, and we can see exactly where his house was. And a short while ago, we found this image from the newspaper, which now has a different meaning. Pai Alberto was shown in an exoticized way to his newspaper readers. This was an illustrated newspaper, and it was basically used as a way of attracting people to buy the newspaper. He's seen as respected as an imposing figure, but this image can be resignified, and it will allow us to understand the rights of the Pai Alberto House and the Our Sacred Collection when the exhibit is opened. So I'd like to conclude by making clear what Manu also mentioned, the unfoldings and the consequences of this work. We're going to have our hands full for a long time with this collection because it's a living collection. It insists on speaking to us. There's still a lot that can be investigated from it. Even objects that ended up in the collection that were not a consequence of an invasion. We recently found by visiting, well, Manu had an interesting partnership with the Museum of the Police. They found a file that shows that one of the capes was not from an invasion. It was a donation One of the cloaks came from one temple that still exists in Rio de Janeiro, and now this cloak is a part of the collection. And now I am introducing this firsthand to FullCircle. I've been working on this investigation for the last few weeks. One of the iconic items in the collection was a Shu Chiriri, and it was also not from a police raid. It actually came from a donation. So we found several unfoldings from this collection. It's fantastic, it's amazing, and we still have a long way to go so that we can explore and work on this collection. And as I said, it speaks to us all the time through research, through the items themselves, sometimes by cleaning an item and finding writing or finding a name. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And let me conclude this presentation. Let me just stop sharing here. So Manu says that she's still trying to find that answer to Mother Nilce. And I think Mother Nilce, all of this study, all of this research helps us to give voice to leaders from the past. And it helps us to, pay reparations to this violence that they suffered in the past. So I try to answer that question every day, just like Manu. How do we fight against religious racism? And I hope that the historical studies that we're doing right now help future generations to understand this, that besides violence, we still had religious leaders who took care of their community. We showed the wealth and the importance of these religious groups, and we hope that we can go beyond repression with this. Thank you.
Obrigada, Eduardo. Thank you so much, Eduardo. Here I am. That was fantastic. And I think we're going to go over a little bit. I hope that the speakers don't mind and the audience doesn't mind if you go over a few minutes. And I hope that Cecilia Inaea, which is Eduardo's daughter, about to be born any moment. We actually chose this date for this webinar based on his wife's due date. So we have a few questions, and what I'm going to do is kind of put them together because most of them go together, I think. And if you are unhappy with that, say something in the chat and I'll try to address it. We have with us a couple of journalists like me, and journalists are very curious people, of course. And one of them wants a quote for a story she's working on, and that has to do with Anita. So you can prepare yourselves to think about that, whether or not you want to be quoted, if you want to comment on it or not. And the question that I think brings, several questions together has to do with the power of the kinds of religious observances and practices that take place in terreiros, and the fear that can inspire. And it's almost, Mac Margolis, who's a journalist who's with us tonight, asked, he put it quite well in Portuguese. So now interpreters going to switch around. He says,
considering the fact that the police, in the name of public authorities, have forfeited those sacred objects, incarcerated Candomblé practitioners, maybe that shows the power of the faith, the Candomblé faith.
Eduardo, I think you told me at some point, you may have said it tonight as well, that the a lot of the persecution started to happen in the early 20th century because Western doctors wanted were competing with the mais and pais de santo and didn't want to do that. They wanted to do away with the traditional practices so that they would dominate in certain terms of medical attention and in health issues. And it seems like that continues to this day. And so I wonder what you have to say about that. I'm sorry, I'm being kind of confused here. And in addition to that, what another journalist from the Associated Press is asking is about what Anitta, the Brazilian singer, posted online, I think it was yesterday, which was all about her Candomblé initiation. And she is a very powerful person in Brazilian society. And she lost followers because she did that. And she then wrote online that she doesn't care. She's very happy if that's the case. And it looks like Mother Nilce would like to comment. Go for it.
When we consider Anitta's case, of course, we're paying attention to it. Anitta suffered religious racism, that's obvious, no question about it. She can do anything as an artist, but when she tells people that she's a Candomblé practitioner, she lost followers, and that shows religious racism. When we consider Candomblé practices, we have those practices, we have our knowledge. And whenever people talk about Candomblé practices, people think about animal sacrifices. And people judge us because we kill animals. Oh, you kill a goat, you kill chicken. Of course, we kill the animals, but we eat those animals after the rituals. You know, basically, we celebrate life and we share food with our community. And we transform those moments in sacred moments. We clean the animals that we kill, we cook them, and we eat them and share with other people in our communities. Oh, people killed a chicken at the crossroads. Come on, Eshu is the Orisha. And we need to pay homage to Eshu. In a Candomblé temple, we have a room for Eshu. And we go there, we sit with Eshu, we share with Eshu, and we are celebrating life by doing that. And people have a very negative image on what we do. What we do is a clean practice. It's important that people understand what we actually do at Candomblé temples. Obviously, there are two ways. We know that some there are bad people in different religions, not only in Candomblé, but also the Catholic Church or some other things. For instance, here in Rio de Janeiro, some people say that they are a Candomblé priest, and then they say things, oh, in 3 hours, I'll get your ex-lover back to you. Of course, it's a lie. Come on. And people argue, oh, I sell a liquid for you to get pregnant. But we know that those things are lies. You know, we Candomblé practitioners, we don't do those things. What we actually do is sharing what we have in Candomblé temples. We have our herbs, we have our baths. We provide food for our own head. If our head is not doing well, we give food to our own head. We give food to our Ori. And you know, Anitta, she is an Ekeji. She's a mother. She's like the eyes of the Orisha. And she lost over 100,000 followers on social media. And, you know, this is just a form of religious racism. That's it. Thank you. I would like to ask Eduardo one thing. This is so interesting that your work is reconstructing a yesteryear Rio de Janeiro. And for example, somebody visiting the Museum of the Republic, what kind of impact is this person going to have in this moment, doing some type of time travel? Through Full Circle, we're focusing on geography, but you're providing people with the opportunity of doing time travel. And people can establish new senses of belonging through that, through visiting the museum. So what kind of impact do you imagine? And even you, Manuela, if you feel like answering this question, go ahead and do it. Julia, thank you so much. One thing that you said as regards research, and you talked about the doctors, and we know that the persecutors in the late 19th century and early 20th century was linked to the doctors. And the doctors knew that Candomblé priestesses and priests, they knew how to heal people because they had knowledge on herbs and nature. And this is the heritage that we get from our ancestors. And this is knowledge that is really connected to the original, to, the first peoples. And medicine colleges, they were founded in Brazil in 1808. And even in Salvador, Mãe Nilce, I hope you enjoy your time in Salvador right now. But medic doctors in Brazil, for them, they felt like they were competing with the Candomblé temples because people, they relied more on Candomblé religious leaders. And when we consider doctors who were members of the elite, who were rich people, who had contacts and everything, they were linked to people who were shaping and drafting the laws. And when we consider the 1890 Penal Code, it was drafted by members of the Brazilian elite in the late 19th century. And when we consider the 20th century, those people were the ones executing those laws and repressing our people. And considering your last question, Julia, in Brazil, all over Brazil, the police does work against Candomblé temples all over Brazil. There are different collections similar to our sacred in other states of Brazil, such as Bahia, and there's the Perseverance collection in Alagoas, which is linked to same practices that happened to our sacred here in Rio de Janeiro. I hope that people can go to the Museum of the Republic and see that for the first time, those collections enable us to go to the origin of the artifacts. And except the cadeira of Dudiaba, the Judiaba chair that was forfeited by the police, the Terreiro do Cambô, they have been demanding to get that chair back, and they got the chair back in Bahia, and that's really great. And there's the name of Jubiaba on the chair, and this is true reparations. And as what Manuelle said before, in the past we would feel sad, but now we're seeing some historical reparations. And it's important that we give the names to the leaders. We found some information in a newspaper on a Candomblé temple that was raided, and we want to give dignity back to those Candomblé temples. Oh, pigtailing on what Eduardo just said, the Jubiaba chair, I saw it. The hero Mukambu de Tato Anselmo, he was a coordinator for Renafro in Salvador. So I had the honor of going to his Candomblé temple and seeing that chair in person. Manu, would you like to say something before Mike finishes? You know, one of the things that you said, I think that Maria Helena is in a better position to answer, but you know, I'll just make two comments. When we consider Anita, you know, there is a campaign called Divulgue Axé, which is to fight fake news on this online warfare. And I really recommend this campaign. And also you can follow Ileo Molungoshun's Instagram. I'm placing it on the chat, and it's portal for you to have access to communications. And we have this Share a Shay campaign, and people tell us how to behave on social media when we face digital attacks. We face physical and cybernetical and digital attacks. So for us, this campaign is not only for us Candomblé practitioners, for us to protect our culture, but also to learn what we can do to fight and stand up for our culture. And you know what happened to Anita, and the fact that she is taking a stance on what she's doing, it's great for us too. And I'm sharing the link with you here on the chat, and if you feel like doing, follow us. Divulgue Axé, Share Axé. I launched this campaign at the UN in Geneva, and it's true. Follow us. And you know, the other thing, somebody talked about power. This, in the 1938, the items in this collection used to be called black magic. And, you know, we haven't been forgotten. And the state, oftentimes we say the state is not present in favelas, in the ghettos. Thank God, it would be so good if we were forgotten and isolated in Black-only communities. But the thing is, we are facing erasure. Religious racism is not like somebody doesn't like your religion. Basically, people want to exterminate our religion. So when people feel that they need to eliminate that certain group, they acknowledge that that group has power and importance. When we consider Brazil's Institution for Cultural Heritage, when they acknowledge that Black heritage has power, they are saying, they are validating us as a powerful group of people. Oftentimes, we Black people are associated to bad things, in a bad way of using energy and religion. And when they classify us as Black magic, they are acknowledging how powerful we are. I'm not going to repeat the same adjectives that they use. So they acknowledge that we have magic, we have power, and we have Ashe, but they don't respect us. When we think about the impact of the Museum of the Republic, and Maria Helena has been working in the museum for a long time, and she has experience with different exhibitions. So when we think about the exhibitions in partnership with the religious leaders, I believe that Maria Helena could tell us about her expectations. I believe that the Museum of the Republic receives plenty of visits from schools. So the museum has been educating kids now. And I believe that the lack of knowledge makes people seek knowledge. So Maria Helena could talk about that. Emanuelle, I didn't understand if you're talking about the exhibition of religious racism. Oh, you can talk about the impact of the exhibition. You know, the Our Sacred exhibition is being organized at the museum, and it's part of reparations. It's the responsibility of the museum to show those sacred objects to people. And we want to show the objects not only to researchers and religious leaders, we want to show it to the public at large. The exhibition is going to be available to the public for at least 3 years. And whenever we interact with the religious leaders, we prepare the items in a better way. So the exhibition of metal items, how are we going to arrange that? And each and every object tells a story. So for us who see those objects as sacred, we are shaping a good exhibition. Manu is right. Every day, schools come to the Museum of the Republic to visit. Therefore, we have a huge popularity. And I believe that the main challenge is to shape public policies to go beyond the work we do at the Museum of the Republic. Our working group has demanded to change the name of the collection that in the past the name was the Collection of Black Magic, and it was a bad name, stigmatizing way. So instead of expanding the idea of those objects, it used to limitate it. And when we changed the name, that was a political action and very useful one. And I believe that the next political action that we need to do is to remove the criminalization of artifacts from our penal code. And this is also linked to Our Sacred collection and to the work we do with the religious leaders. Not only should we share information with the schools, but we need to add that information to school curriculums, to public budget, so that we build sustainability of the reparations. This is what I believe in.
All right, that's what we're going to fight for. Thank you, everyone. Mike's just going to give us some closing remarks, but I mean, I have no words to thank you. This was a great event. Mike?
Well, it's almost time to say goodbye. But first, my Nilce, Maria Helena, Emanuelle, Eduardo, all of our attendees who stuck it out till the very end, the Comunica Tech team, and of course, the FullCircle team, everyone working behind the scenes. Thank you all so much. I've been part of planning this event ever since it was a twinkle in Julia's eye, and I learned so much tonight. So this was a great experience for me, and I hope it was for everyone else. For the audience, I'd like you to know this, that the stories that you've heard here today are historic. The fact that they're becoming part of permanent public discourse is exceptional. Most moving is that everyone came together from so many different backgrounds, beliefs, and priorities to create this harmony. It's an example of how healing the world is possible when you're brave enough to look at the past to inform yourself about a better future. One we encounter with respect for each other, and now as one community.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone. We'll be sending out the recording links for Zoom and YouTube in case you want to share this with people or watch part of it. Sign up for our wait list, make a donation. Thank you all very, very much. Good night.